Hello, welcome to the Horti-Culturalists. I am Matthew Lucas.
And I'm Stephen Ryan.
And we post every week on a Friday, so do subscribe to watch our continuing horticultural adventures.
And don't forget, if you've got a burning horticultural question you'd like me to deal with, put it in the comments below. Give me where you're from so that I have some context, and we will try and answer them in our Monday shorts.
We will indeed. And today, Stephen, where are we?
Well, we're at probably one of the most important war memorials in the country, and that's the Shrine of Remembrance at Melbourne.
And we're here today because today, 25th of April, is ANZAC Day in Australia and New Zealand. And ANZAC, for those of you not in Australia or New Zealand, stands for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. And it's the phrase that I guess sums up the armed services in both Australia and New Zealand. And ANZAC Day is the celebration and remembrance for those involved in and lost in wars throughout the history, really, of Australia and New Zealand. And it is, I guess, similar to Veterans Day in North America and Remembrance Day in Britain, which is in November.
Yes, exactly. And we're here, though, not just to look at the shrine, but we've come here to look at some remarkable landscaping that has been done here. And we're going to actually talk to the landscape designer that designed some of these courtyards we're going to visit. So he's going to be able to tell us the whole background and why, the wherefore, the types of plants that were used, what they were trying to evoke.
And they are very, very beautiful. So I think, without any further ado, the trickling water of this memorial here is driving us up the hill to the memorial. We should go meet Michael.
All right, what a good idea. Well, here we are at the shrine, up on the balcony with this fabulous view over Melbourne. And I'd like to introduce you, Matthew, to Michael Wright.
Michael Wright, hello.
How you going, Matthew?
I'm very well.
Yeah.
Thank you for having us today. And the sun is shining. For those of you who don't know Melbourne or Australia, ta-da!
Yes,
Yeah.
it's just behind us. The shrine is on a very important knoll where you get a view all over Melbourne, and it really is quite spectacular. So, Michael is from a landscape architect firm called Rush Wright, and he has been involved in the landscape design of the courtyards and some other parts around the shrine, which is why we're here today.
We are. So I guess the first question is, what was here when you were given the brief, and then what was the idea you came up with?
Well, that's a very interesting question, Matthew. What was here was the essentially unchanged World War I memorial, which we're standing on, and the World War II forecourt, which we can see below us.
Yep.
And they hadn't really been touched since 1954.
Right.
The brief was working with the architects Ashton and McDougall to consider how a visitor centre could be brought to this site, and then also to resolve disabled access, because it was a place full of stairs.
So there was that. Now, you did make the point, I think, that in 1954, a lot of that work had been done in preparation for the Queen Elizabeth II's first visit to Australia as Queen.
That's right. Yeah, that was one of her royal occasions, was to open the new World War II memorial.
Which is this one here.
Yeah. Because the original design couldn't accommodate a large crowd. It was actually a reflecting water pool out the front here, which constrained the number of crowds that could be here.
Would have been lovely.
Yeah.
That's very reflective.
Yeah, and it had poplars, white poplars planted down the sides. And
Right.
in 2000, Ashton and McDougall were engaged, and we were part of the design team that came up with the idea for the courtyards and the visitor centre.
You were employed to do the job, but what was the sort of ethos behind the courtyards and the visitor centre and so forth? What sort of theming was involved?
Yeah, part of the thinking was to bring something new to this complex of buildings, but also be very, very respectful of the heritage. So the shapes of the courtyards themselves are very, very, faceted and fragmented. And,
They are. They're very beautiful.
yeah, really beautiful shapes. And the front elevation of the building is particularly fine. Like they're adding a sort of buttressing effect. But the landscape design will vary. There's 4 of them now, and the landscape designs vary, one to the other. The entry courtyard is really a place of emptiness, sort of signifying kind of loss and almost a shock environment. You're in a sort of blast bunker or something.
It's quite stark.
Yeah, very stark. Stark's a very good word. And then to the northwest here we have what's called the garden courtyard, or really the Gallipoli courtyard. Focus on the transplantation of a really large olive tree, and then there are memories of Gallipoli, the Mediterranean, and indeed North Africa. Then down here on the southwest we have a courtyard really dedicated to the Pacific theatre of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So that's represented by a range of plants from the tropics and subtropics, and indeed a really fantastic ficus from New Guinea.
We're going to go and have a look at each of these later on. And I guess
Yeah.
#blessed is that our climate enables you to create a
Yeah.
tropical, subtropical garden.
Next to a Mediterranean.
Next to
one.
Mediterranean
I
garden.
mean, how lucky can we
And
be?
there's sort of a desert one just over there, but we'll get to all of that.
Yeah, and I think, one advantage of this site too is the proximity to Royal Botanic Gardens, where there
Which is
was,
just over there, viewers.
like literally 200 metres away, I've got the Royal Botanic Gardens, one of the greatest botanical collections in the world. And that's where I saw Ficus Chamaerops, the New Guinea ficus, growing. And we actually asked the gardens to propagate it for us for this project. So we had just enough lead time to get one.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. So it went in literally only about, it was a 30 centimetre pot. It went in about, half a metre high or something,
Yeah.
a few leaves.
But with these huge big leaves on
Yeah,
it nonetheless.
yeah.
Yes, it's the most bizarre plant.
And the other thing is the microclimate. Here we've got a northeast and northwest. The northwestern courtyard obviously gets tremendous afternoon sun. So the Mediterranean collection does well in there. Whereas the southwest is also an interesting prospect because it's quite overshadowed in winter, but then also gets that afternoon sun to warm it up, which allows some of the subtropical stuff to perform quite well.
And then the remaining courtyards.
That's the schools or group entry courtyard, and that's the big horticultural feature in there is an artificial poppy that was designed by the architects. It's really designed to shade that courtyard, and it's a courtyard that doesn't have any plants in it, but it has a feeling of horticultural, kind of panache because of this enormous red flower that you'll see.
And of course, for those overseas who don't get the connection either, the red poppy is the symbol of ANZAC Day. And so whenever we celebrate our war dead, we all wear a poppy. And so it's very apropos.
Which is also the same in Britain for Remembrance Day in November. So this is, it's a cultural site, it's a heritage site, it's a very emotional site for lots of people, and I imagine there are lots of levels of stakeholders. So coming to a project like this and instigating quite significant change, how was that in terms of navigating it? And did you have to compromise the plan, or was it fairly smooth sailing? How did it roll?
There are obviously, like in a big project like this, there are always interesting moments, but the client was very well advised. One of their trustees was an architect who was involved in the commissioning process, and they had senior project managers and members of the trustees who really keen to modernise the public perception of the shrine, to increase visitation, to make it more comfortable, and then they had the kind of vision of the galleries coming underneath. So they were a very, very well informed client group, and hats off to them for really sponsoring what is quite a radical design proposition by the architects for the courtyards. Brave and significant intervention into a heritage structure. If you think about what happened on the Western Front with the Commonwealth War Graves Commission and those sort of structures by Edward Lutyens and others, this fits in with that sort of pattern of a deep sense of loss and memorialisation. And it's those ideas, loss, memorialisation, pathos, empathy, that somehow had to become infused in the courtyard designs.
That's a lot. A lot to incorporate
It's not just a few roses.
No. I guess now turning the narrative, so there is a wider area. So you've got the immediacy of the courtyards and the shrine itself.
Right.
Then there's this sort of vast swathe of ground around. So what was the plan there?
Well, the shrine had been essentially planting trees there since the 30s, using building on trees already here from an earlier private property, and there'd been various designs done for those trees, and the City of Melbourne had been working with them in a sense like the domain parklands. So what we had here was an irrigated green sward with this, an unusual collection of species of trees, and starting early in the 2000s, the great dry period, the millennial drought began in Victoria.
Oh yes.
And that's when a lot of the species started to fail. They were old, they'd been 70 years old plus. And that's when a big change was considered for the grounds, that it should all be more drought tolerant species, things that would tolerate periods of drought, things that didn't need water just to survive in Melbourne because of our pronounced wet and dry Mediterranean kind of climate. So that's when stone pines, oaks, cypress, all came in, trees from California, South Africa, the wider Mediterranean. The tree plantings were all considered somewhat with microclimate in mind. So, we've got this idea of a building on a dry hill. So back in the day, this was talked about as Melbourne's Acropolis. When this is Tynon granite sent in from Gippsland, it was a lot whiter. And in fact, the courtyard walls for the new courtyards are all clad in Tynon granite. But it hasn't yet started to
so it doesn't fit in quite yet.
display its iron content.
Yeah.
So early on, the building was this very, very stark white building on the hill with very few trees, standing out like the white stones of the Acropolis on the hill.
You can see that, yeah.
And then it started to weep. So the building is sort of rusting and weeping and aging and in some ways getting sadder.
Very poetic. Now, you mentioned too that there have been various plantings of the avenues, and at the moment they're Bhutanese cypress, and the one on that side, which is that south?
That's right.
Lost my orientation.
Yeah.
So that again, another Elizabethan visit. Elizabeth II visited in 84, I think.
83.
83.
Yeah, 1983, I think.
So that was planted for her. So she must have been quite familiar with the changes of the war memorial.
That's right. Yeah.
One of the things you can notice here is there's a little sort of sub garden along there which looks quite deserty. There's a lot of cacti down there.
Yeah.
So what's the story with that little
Well,
garden?
that's the post-World War II memorial, I think it's called. Post-45 memorial, which essentially memorialises all the peacekeeping missions that Australian forces have conducted. We think they're about Timor, Leste, Afghanistan, Iraq, even Vietnam is memorialised down there. It's always been a slightly uncomfortable relationship between the sort of scale and significance of the World War I memorial that we're standing on, the World War II memorial, and what happened afterwards. Because obviously these were very, very much more significant events. But the new generation of veterans, of course, are much more connected to what's happened post-World War II.
Yes, of course.
So that was essentially renovated. A new planting scheme by Catherine Ricaris, landscape architect, was planted down there. And it's very successful and very interesting.
Well, Michael, thank you for the overview. I think what we might do now is actually descend into the courtyards and have a closer look.
Great idea. I unfortunately don't have a parachute with me.
So we'll have to
We'll
go
take
down
the
the
stairs.
stairs. Yes.
We'll take the stairs.
Yeah, all right. So here we are in the first courtyard, Michael. So what was the actual idea behind this one?
Well, as you can see, Stephen, this is the main entry courtyard. So this is where people come and gather. They might get off a coach, come in here and gather. But the real design intention is about a kind of shock. A shock of barrenness, the absence of plants compared to outside, the red on the walls, even the blood on the walls, which you can see behind us. There's an idea that you're in a very a space of very, very special significance.
Yeah, well, it certainly exudes that.
It's very striking too. And what is the text on the wall?
That does say "Lest we forget,"
Right.
which is of course part of the ANZAC Day
Yes.
service and memorialisation.
Yeah. All right. So this is where you come in.
Yeah.
Let's go now to the second
Fantastic.
courtyard.
Let's do that.
Yes, we'll see plants. All right, so now we're in the second courtyard, which has a completely different theme. It actually has plants in it. And
It does.
which for me is important. And even if I wasn't a horticulturalist, I would walk into a space like this and go, ooh, Mediterranean.
Oh, would you?
Yes,
Oh.
I would.
Yeah, so would I, oddly enough.
Yes.
And what are the signifiers of Mediterranean?
Well, you've got grey foliage trees.
Yeah.
You've got solid evergreens like bay and that sort of thing as well,
Yeah.
which are all classical Mediterranean plants. So it feels Mediterranean when I walk in here. So I'm assuming it's not sort of so Mediterranean that everything is authentically of that part of the world. It's a plant that works.
Close. Obviously, the Mediterranean is a very, very big environment to choose plants from.
Yeah.
We've got North Africa, we've got Eastern Mediterranean, Southern Mediterranean, Western Mediterranean. So it's a very broad palette, as it were. But the central feature, of course, is the olive tree.
Which is beautiful.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
Very large olive that was growing about 50 metres away, actually, Stephen.
Yeah.
Ah.
And that's the legacy olive. It was planted in 1973 and was moved onto into this project as the centrepiece, as a deliberate sort of idea about the garden.
And of course, olive trees have so much significance anyway. I mean, they're considered trees of peace, and dove carrying olive branch, all that sort of stuff. So there's an enormous amount of symbolism involved in it.
Yeah. And I think part of that is, moving a tree like this, it was sort of easy on this site because you didn't have to navigate roads and put on a truck and all the practicalities of moving a tree around. So it was a lucky it was a lucky sort of circumstance that it was close enough to move.
What I noticed, ironically, lurking at the base is
Yeah.
a little clump of bromeliads,
Oh yes.
Oh,
which
yeah. Yeah.
turned out to be not a sticky point, but tell us about the bromeliads.
Well, I mean, as this garden evolved, obviously there was more understory plants here, and we're now talking 20 plus years since it was planted, so there's more shade, more root competition, so things have gradually fallen away. So I think the gardeners have been maintaining it, just thought, oh, bromeliads, they're going to grow in very dry shade under the olive trees and persist, and they're making quite a nice colony now. So I think it's quite intriguing. It's kind of the sort of thing that a Mediterranean gardener might do, because their grandmother gave them something.
So I guess this is the bigger piece then about garden design and rigidity, that, this is my design, this is my palette, how dare you, versus the fact that it's obviously growing and it's organic, and also the people who are maintaining it start to get involved. So what do you think about that kind of intervention to a plan?
Well, I think it's interesting because it raises the issue of what is the relationship between a patron and the gardener, or the garden designer, between the client and the garden designer, the landscape architect. And you kind of have to imagine yourself into a situation that you're working with the personality of that client to create something. And you might not always get it right. And people change, and gardens have to change.
Yeah.
And I think the idea that they have to be, absolutely, completely,
rigidly in place.
to me is wrong. And I think it's the big difference between when I visited Christopher Lloyd's garden at Great Dixter while Christopher was still alive, and then visiting Sissinghurst on the same day. One was a living, organic, messy place that reflected...
It was a home.
It was a home.
Yeah.
It was an Edwin Lutyens renovation.
Yes.
That reflected the personality of the person, of Christopher Lloyd. Whereas Sissinghurst was so perfect, so beautifully maintained by the National Trust, that it felt to me like a museum. And that's the difference.
I had exactly the same feeling with both those gardens, I have to say.
Back to the garden. So just give us a list of the things that you planted in here, the species. We've got a group of palms here, the olive. So what are the palms?
Well, they're Chamaerops humilis from North Africa and Mediterranean. Not entirely exactly sure where. I know they extend up into
They're
Morocco.
they're in Morocco because I've seen them there. Just dropping names.
They're in seed, quite stinky.
Yes, well, they won't be in seed all that long.
I guess that smell obviously attracts animals to eat them.
Yeah, they're probably getting eaten by possums or other small animals.
Ratus, but let's not go there. And what's this sort of hedge of oak?
Well, that was meant to be a little bit taller, but I think it's being hedged at a particular height for safety reasons, which of course is another big factor in public landscape design. But that's Quercus robur Fastigiata. Obviously robur, widespread around the Mediterranean.
What is the spiky thing in front of this?
Well, the spiky
That's a
thing
very technical...
comes from the nurseryman of a maniac on Mount Macedon.
Is this you responsible for that?
A very nice nurseryman on Mount Macedon.
Yes.
It's Eryngium pandanifolium, a fantastic clump-forming, suckering plant. It can get much larger than it is here. Likes a bit of water.
Yeah.
And as I recall, came from the great garden of Great Dixter.
Yeah, the original seed was grown by me from Great Dixter. Having said that, it goes back even further because Christo used to call it the Chelsea Physic Garden Dark Form. So it must have come originally from the Chelsea Physic Garden to Great Dixter, then to me, then grown on by me, and then ends up here at the shrine. So there you go.
And I've planted it in a number of places in central Victoria where it's really quite weedy.
Great. Well, let's not go into that. All right. I think we need to head off to the next courtyard.
Yes,
the
let's go and have a look
Pacific one.
Oh, yes. Yes. I'll be definitely in my element there.
Well, here we are, Michael, in the third courtyard, which is representative of the Pacific arenas of war, I guess. And it is beautiful. I mean, they're all beautiful, but I think in terms of, we've made a film about zonal denial, what you can and can't grow, where you shouldn't and should grow it, but this sort of embodies all of those risks and experiments. So talk us through the idea and what you wanted to create in this space and whether it worked or didn't.
This space is centred around this big ficus tree, Ficus rubiginosa.
Which is stunning.
Which was an interesting tree that came down from tree's impact. It originally had two trunks, and it had been chopped off, so it was like a nursery failure.
All right.
So it was brought in as like a veteran tree.
Which is appropriate.
It was damaged, it was not a conventional shape, not unlike the way that bonsai is treated. in Japan, like a big bonsai essentially with, a very, very characterful tree, but also that it was a bit like a banyan tree of the Asian temple.
Yes.
Because of course, wherever you go, Cambodia, Vietnam particularly, I had seen a big banyan in a courtyard in Hanoi. So it was a little bit of an idea about the banyan brought into this semi-sacred veterans memorial to sort of set the theme of the Pacific and of Asia. Because we're here we're memorialising Vietnam and other theatres like that, and particularly New Guinea as well.
I guess we alluded to the fact earlier that the climate in Melbourne is a very benign one, so you can grow things that are basically tropical, not every tropical plant, but some. So talk us through some of the species. So you've mentioned the ficus. What else is here?
There's another amazing fig tree here just behind us, the ficus Chamaerops from
yes.
New Guinea. A wonderful, huge pleated leaves.
They are amazing.
Crazy kind of big ficus bulbs, which are apparently edible. And also, obviously, the bamboo is a
I was going to say the bamboo exudes the Orient, doesn't it?
This is the ghost bamboo, Dendrocalamus minor var amoenus.
Oh, goodness.
Goodness me.
Yes.
Sorry
I'm
for
the one-
swearing on your horticultural channel.
Matthew will have to look it up and get the
I'm the
spelling
one
right
who
for
has to put all the names on.
So ghost
And
bamboo.
Strelitzia here.
Yeah, Strelitzia nicolai, which is it's used often in Melbourne, a very tall banana relative. And also near,
wonderful white and purple blue flowers.
that's right, yeah. Possibly overused, but very useful here because it gets almost no sun in the morning for most of the year, and then a huge blast of afternoon sun, which it doesn't mind. So that's great for that. And then behind that, a young specimen of Ceiba speciosa, the Mayan tree of life with its extraordinary spiky trunk.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is remarkable. Not for the average tree hugger, I have to
no,
say. Wonderful form too. I like the way the Ceiba gets that sort of horizontal layered effect to the branches.
And Cassonia.
Yeah, and Cassonia paniculata, also growing there for its tolerance of that afternoon sun position against a concrete wall. So,
And then there are, I guess you might say, common houseplants. So there's Monstera around the wall too.
Monstera deliciosa, for its ability to climb up the walls. We've got 6 metre walls down here.
Yes, we're enclosed in very high walls all around us, and yet you don't feel closed in by it now that the plants have really established.
No, the other thing, there are many things about all of these courtyards, but the other thing too that caught my eye was the euphorbia over there.
Yeah.
Given that this is so shady, particularly in winter, yet it seems to be thriving. Which euphorbia is that?
It's called Euphorbia lipstick pink.
Aha!
It's a hybrid of Christogalli and another euphorbia. Very good for that tough, dry position. It's filled with fig roots over there, and it's growing in between a key motif of this garden, which are these concrete, unexplained concrete foundation shapes, which are meant to look like the relics of fortifications,
Right.
or a military emplacement. We worked very, very hard on the planning to try and make what is a 20 by 10 space into an intricate environment.
It feels massive, and in terms of the fact that many people now don't have large gardens, and many people have courtyard gardens.
It's all about careful plant selection.
Yeah.
I would say, in a jungly setting like this, overplanting, like a deliberate policy of overplanting.
That'll suit you perfectly.
Yeah.
Oh, it will. Watch this space. And is it really then a question of sort of survival of the fittest at the understory, particularly?
Well, yeah. I mean, here we've got understory coming and going. There's some gingers over here which are down now because they're finished for the summer, but they'll be coming back. But I think also the idea that it's rare in a garden design for anybody, I think, that you can actually picture exactly what it's going to be like, say in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years. So this sort of loose planting idea that we've developed means you can put it all in, and then the garden evolves out of the removal of plants. And I can see here there are things that probably should now be removed, and I think that's an essential part of gardening, is knowing when to say, look, that was
then.
and this is now.
And it was good then.
So
and
what
there's more shade now. There's more shade. I
Yeah.
need to do something differently. Even the ficus growing on the seats, that was unexpected. That's fantastic.
And just tell me, what's the text, the cutout on the red panels?
They are the names of Victorian towns from which servicemen and women have derived from.
Right.
From the service record.
Very striking. It's beautiful. We're coming on to the last courtyard, so we should head on off.
What a good idea. Well, here we are in the fourth of the courtyards around the shrine, and this one is completely plantless. So it obviously has a purpose, though.
Yeah, that's right, Stephen. And this was designed in collaboration with Ashton Ragan McDougall again. And I guess the main motif is the red poppy. So it's not entirely plantless.
Yes.
It's just that the plants are artificial.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
So what did this have to do as a space?
Well, essentially, groups of school kids largely, come in here, mill around, and then sit on the terraces in this courtyard. And it's designed to kind of bring a bit of hush. They're often noisy little groups. So here,
as children can be.
So here we've got a rubber surface underneath, which just sort of brings that acoustic dampening, and so it's a good place to talk to people because the acoustics are very good.
Yeah.
They are.
And
They
I
are.
guess you've got a chance then of getting the children in the right mood before
right.
they visit this important shrine. They should be quiet, they should be
right.
respectful and all that. So
And also to be a very graphic space. So like for a kid coming and seeing a 10 by 10 metre poppy, you don't forget that idea kind of is presented so strongly and forcefully that
yes, it'll resonate with them for a long time.
that's right. Yeah.
Well, this whole journey has been wonderful.
Yeah,
Thank you
terrific.
so much for
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
us
No worries,
through
Matthew.
the
Yeah.
design, the problems, the things you put in it, the things you had to solve.
Yeah.
It's been really fantastic. Thank you.
No worries at all. And thank you, Stephen, very much.
Wow.
Yeah. Maybe we could continue with our loud shirt competition.
Yeah, oh yes, well we can do that as well.
Someone will always win. Well,
Yeah.
Michael, we're going to go and wander off and look at some other aspects of the garden, but thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. Thanks,
Thank
Stephen.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, Matthew, we're in the Remembrance Garden now. So it's particularly dedicated to places like Cambodia and other parts of the world where our troops have fought. And there's some remarkable plants in this part of the garden.
Yes, and I guess it's also post-war, so a lot of the desert campaigns in Iraq and Afghanistan. So what are some of the things? I mean, what's this right behind us?
An opuntia, so that's one of the larger growing cacti.
Amazing.
And there's also some other cacti down behind us here, the name of which I have no idea, but anyhow, beautiful cylindrical structural looking plants. And there's melianthuses growing around us, so there's some nice melianthus here, which is a South African plant, of course. And funnily enough, one of the plants that I think stands out for me are these dark-leafed rubber trees.
It's stunning.
Yeah, the Ficus elastica in its dark form, which I think is wonderful. And the red buds as they're unfurling to send out the next set of leaves are just fantastic.
It is, and I guess this garden personifies Melbourne's climatic conditions in that there is so much that we can grow here. So from cacti to tropical, all in one walk.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a cacophony of different plants.
A cacophony.
But they're all texturally interesting, they're bold, and so they arrest you as you come along and you have to stop and look. So it's working very well as a contemplative space.
It is. One of the things Michael was mentioning was this replacement of an old poplar avenue. And what are these trees?
All right, well, they've planted Agathis robusta, which is the Queensland kauri, and they're still young trees, but they're starting to do their job. They're giving you that sort of vertical accent as you come up this path, because it's one of the main entry areas to the shrine.
Yeah.
So people would get off a tram down on St Kilda Road down there, walk up this path to get themselves to the entry of the visitor centre. And so these trees will give you that sense of importance as you come up this path. And as young trees, they're good. As old trees, they're going to be absolutely stunning. So they'll be these huge trunks. So it'll be like walking up past colonnades of pillars.
And they have a beautiful colour. I think when we looked at southern conifers, we looked at the very mature specimen in the Botanic Gardens,
Which is only just across the road.
the other side of the hill.
Yep.
And for those of you not in Melbourne or Australia, Stephen mentioned trams. Yes, Melbourne is one of the only cities in the world, like Vienna and I think Calcutta, that still has trams, in San Francisco.
And we love them.
We do.
Yes.
Now, Michael mentioned the Gallipoli Garden, which is really the sort of one of the many entrances
Yes.
to the shrine. And of course, perhaps for those of you not that familiar with Australian history either, Gallipoli was, I guess, the defining battle of the First World War in terms of the ANZAC tradition, which is what this day commemorates.
Exactly. And it was a terrible loss to Australia. We lost a lot of young men at Gallipoli. So the plants that have been used here are Many of them are Mediterranean plants, so that's very appropriate. But there are also plants here that come from other parts of the world that have a Mediterranean feel. So again, the planting hasn't been slavish to geography. It's about evoking the right theme.
I feel, and it really does, you do feel like you're in that drier eastern corner of the Mediterranean. And what are some of the plants, Stephen?
Well, there's a very handsome carob tree over there, which of course is classically Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And above me is a Turkey oak.
Very appropriate. Gallipoli of course, in modern day Turkey.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a range of other plants. There is a ruscus, which grows well in dry shade. There's rosemary, of course, and rosemary is also the plant of remembrance, so it's very appropriate, and also Mediterranean.
What's the grass, which is very beautiful?
Well, it's one of the miscanthuses. I'm assuming it's Miscanthus gracilis. Of course, it's Asian in origin, the Miscanthus grasses. So again, not authentic, but it just evokes that sort of sense of place.
This is a very beautiful entryway into the garden.
It is indeed.
Well, Stephen, Ryan, that was fantastic. I think my favourite is the Pacific courtyard.
I thought it would be because it's got just the sort of plant material that would excite you.
Oh, and I'm at the pointy end now of actually thinking about our courtyard. It's a fraction of that size, but so many trees.
Yep.
In fact, both the planted courtyards have a lot of trees in them.
Yes, they do, and it's probably a great lesson for everybody with a small garden. That doesn't mean you have to exclude trees. In fact, it should make sure that you do include trees because they give you shade, they soak up moisture, so they mitigate flooding, they do all sorts of useful jobs. And so, yes, we should all engage with trees.
Well, there you go. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our ANZAC Day special, and if you want to know what we're doing next week, hit subscribe. We post every week.
And we'll see you soon.
Bye all.
Bye.